The United States is no longer the world's undisputed leader. For the first time in modern history, another nation isn't just competing, it's overtaking. And it's not happening on the battlefield or in political speeches. It's happening in factories, labs, boardrooms, and shipping ports. That nation is China. In just a few decades, China has transformed from a low-cost manufacturer into a technological superpower, an infrastructure giant, and a global dealmaker. It's building alliances, controlling critical industries, and exporting not just products, but influence. Meanwhile, the United States, distracted by internal divisions, short-term politics, and aging infrastructure, is falling behind. But how did this reversal happen? The narrative we were told was simple. China copied, the US innovated. China assembled, the US led. But that story is no longer true, and hasn't been for years. Today, China leads the world in electric vehicle production, 5G infrastructure, green energy deployment, and even artificial intelligence development. Its Belt and Road Initiative is redrawing the map of global influence. And behind it all is a central government with a plan, a long-term strategy aimed at reshaping global power dynamics. The US, in contrast, is reacting, often late, often fragmented. In this video, we'll dive deep into 7 key areas where China is not just catching up, but pulling ahead. We'll uncover how manufacturing, technology, policy, education, and global strategy have created a new kind of superpower. And by the end, one question will linger. Is the US prepared for a future it no longer controls? China now produces more than 28% of the world's manufacturing output. That's more than the United States, Japan, and Germany combined. This didn't happen overnight. In the early 1980s, China was barely on the map when it came to industrial output. But then came Deng Xiaoping's economic reforms, opening the country to foreign investment and global trade. Western companies rushed in, lured by cheap labor and favorable policies. What started as simple assembly quickly evolved into something far more strategic. But here's where the story takes a turn. While Western executives saw China as a place to cut costs, Beijing saw manufacturing as a pathway to power. The government invested heavily in industrial infrastructure, logistics, and workforce training. Over time, Chinese firms moved up the value chain, from textiles to electronics, from low-tech to high-tech. And while the US allowed much of its industrial base to hollow out, outsourcing production, shuttering factories, and focusing on services, China went in the opposite direction. It built entire industrial cities. It dominated steel, cement, and rare earths. And eventually, it cornered markets in batteries, semiconductors, and solar panels. Today, if you want to build anything, from an iPhone to an electric car, you need China. And it's not just about scale. It's about speed, control, and vertical integration. Chinese companies can go from design to mass production in a fraction of the time it takes in the US. They control supply chains, raw materials, and increasingly, the standards that govern global production. The US once prided itself on being the workshop of the world. But now, much of that machinery hums in Shenzhen, Chengdu, and Suzhou, not Detroit or Pittsburgh. So the question isn't whether China can manufacture. It's whether America can afford to let it manufacture everything. And if the next industrial revolution is built in Asia, what role does the US play at all? China is no longer just catching up in technology. In many areas, it's leading. For years, the common belief was that China copies, while America creates. But today, that belief is outdated and dangerously misleading. Take artificial intelligence. China now publishes more AI research papers than any other country and is investing billions into AI startups and national labs. Major breakthroughs like DeepSeek V2, a Chinese large language model rivaling OpenAI's GPT, show that China is not just using AI, it's building it, and fast. In quantum computing, Chinese scientists have claimed world records in quantum supremacy. In facial recognition, surveillance systems, and computer vision, Chinese companies lead the world, backed by massive datasets and state support. Then there's electric vehicles. The US gave us Tesla, but China gave us the EV ecosystem. In 2023 alone, China produced more than 8 million electric vehicles, over half of the world's total. Companies like BYD are now outselling Tesla in global markets, and Chinese EVs are cheaper, faster to produce, and fully backed by state policy. And while the US debates infrastructure bills, China has already built millions of EV charging stations, a vast high-speed rail network, and entire smart cities connected by 5G. Meanwhile, in renewable energy, China is the undisputed leader. It produces over 80% of the world's solar panels, dominates wind turbine manufacturing, and controls much of the global supply chain for critical materials like lithium and cobalt. But how did this happen? Simple. China thinks long-term. The government sets 10-year targets. Tech giants like Huawei and Tencent align with state goals. Universities work hand in hand with industry. It's a national project, not just a market race. The US, on the other hand, often relies on private companies to solve public problems, with little coordination and even less patience. Yes, the US still leads in areas like advanced chip design and defense tech, but the gap is closing. And in key areas that define the next era, AI, clean energy, smart infrastructure, China is moving faster, scaling bigger, and thinking further ahead. So the question becomes, can America innovate quickly enough to stay relevant in a game where China is setting the pace? Made in China 2025 was more than a slogan. It was a declaration of intent. Launched in 2015, this bold government initiative set a clear goal: to make China the global leader in high-tech industries. These included robotics, aerospace, semiconductors, biotech, and advanced materials, all sectors where the US traditionally held the upper hand. The plan wasn't subtle. It aimed to reduce dependence on foreign technology and build Chinese dominance in the industries of the future. In short, China didn't want to just assemble iPhones. It wanted to design the chips inside them, launch the satellites above them, and control the networks they run on. This initiative triggered alarm bells in Washington and across Europe. It was the first time China openly stated it intended to move beyond being the world's factory and into becoming the world's innovation hub. Western countries criticized the plan, calling it state-driven protectionism. But criticism didn't slow it down. Instead, China doubled down, quietly removing the name from official speeches, but continuing the mission under new labels and broader strategies. So, what did it achieve? A lot. In less than a decade, China made massive progress in robotics, became a global leader in EVs, poured billions into semiconductor production, and launched its own space station. It began outpacing the West in R&D spending, climbing up global innovation rankings year after year. Meanwhile, US innovation policy remained fragmented. Tech development was often driven by private companies focused on quarterly profits. Government strategy? Often caught in political gridlock. The real advantage of Made in China 2025 wasn't just money. It was coordination. China synchronized its entire system, industry, universities, and government, around national objectives. And that leads to a hard question. Can a free market system like the US match the speed and focus of a state-led economy with a 30-year plan? Because while America debates, China builds. In 2018, the US launched a trade war against China, slapping billions in tariffs on Chinese goods in an attempt to rebalance the economic relationship. The goal? Slow down China's rise, protect American industries, and force fairer trade terms. But the results were mixed. While tariffs disrupted trade and raised prices, they didn't stop China's momentum. In fact, they pushed China to double down on self-reliance, accelerating investment in domestic production, supply chain control, and homegrown tech. On paper, the U.S. tariffs were meant to hurt China. But in reality, American consumers paid the price. The cost of everything from electronics to clothing went up, and many U.S. farmers, once reliant on Chinese buyers, were caught in the crossfire. Even worse, U.S. companies didn't rush back to American factories. Instead, they moved to Vietnam, Mexico, or India, keeping supply chains offshore but just outside China's borders. China, meanwhile, struck back with its own tariffs and trade deals. It strengthened ties with Asia, Latin America, and Africa. And in 2020, it signed the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, RCEP, the world's largest free trade agreement, with 15 Asia-Pacific countries. So, who won? It's complicated. The U.S. highlighted national security concerns and banned companies like Huawei from using American tech. China responded by ramping up efforts to make its own semiconductors. In the end, the trade war didn't resolve the core issue, that China is no longer a junior economic partner. It's a rival superpower, and the world's supply chains are now deeply tied to its success. But did the U.S. start a trade war too late, or in the wrong way? Because while both countries took hits, China came out more resilient and more determined. While the U.S. was focused inward, China was building outward. Launched in 2013, the Belt and Road Initiative is the most ambitious global infrastructure project in modern history. Its goal? Connect Asia, Africa, Europe, and beyond through a massive web of roads, railways, ports, and digital infrastructure, all with China at the center. More than 150 countries have signed on. From Kenya to Kazakhstan, Laos to Italy, Chinese money is pouring into airports, highways, energy plants, and fiber optic cables. But this isn't just about construction, it's about influence. By funding critical infrastructure in developing nations, China gains political leverage, long-term access to resources, and a global network of economic allies. It's soft power, built with hard assets. Compare that to the U.S. While Washington cut foreign aid and focused on military alliances, China was offering roads, bridges, and power grids. While American diplomats talked about democracy, Chinese engineers showed up with blueprints and bulldozers. To many countries, the choice was easy. Take the deal. Of course, the BRI isn't without controversy. Some call it debt trap diplomacy, accusing China of burdening poorer countries with unsustainable loans. Others warn about environmental damage or political dependency. But despite criticism, the scope is undeniable. Chinese companies are now building the physical and digital backbone of the 21st century global economy. And in places where the U.S. once had influence, China now holds the keys. So, can America remain a global leader if it's not helping build the global future? Because while the U.S. debates immigration or defense budgets, China is laying down rails, plugging in ports, and wiring up continents, one contract at a time. China isn't just building roads and factories, it's building minds. In the last 2 decades, China has massively increased investment in education and research. Today, it graduates more scientists and engineers than any other country. Its universities are climbing the global rankings. And its government has made one thing clear: innovation starts in the classroom. Each year, millions of Chinese students enroll in STEM programs. Many study abroad, especially in the U.S. But a growing number are staying home thanks to improving local institutions like Tsinghua and Peking University, which now rival the Ivy League in specific fields. Meanwhile, China's spending on research and development has skyrocketed. It's now the second largest R&D spender in the world, just behind the US, but the gap is shrinking fast. What's more, China isn't just spending, it's targeting. It pours money into AI, biotech, semiconductors, aerospace, and quantum computing. These aren't random choices. They're the exact sectors needed to dominate the future. And unlike in the US, where public funding for education is often caught in political fights, China's strategy is long-term and coordinated. At the same time, China is working aggressively to attract top global talent, offering incentives, research funding, and prestigious positions. The result? A brain gain. Even as the US faces a brain drain fueled by visa hurdles and political instability. In contrast, the US education system, once the gold standard, is under pressure. Rising tuition, underfunded schools, and political battles over curricula have made it harder for young Americans to compete globally. So, the tough question is, if China trains more scientists, funds more research, and builds stronger institutions, can the US keep its innovation edge? Because whoever leads in knowledge leads in power. The race isn't over, but the rules have changed. China's rise isn't a fluke. It's the result of decades of planning, discipline, and investment. And while the US still holds major strengths in entrepreneurship, global alliances, and advanced technologies, it's clear reactive policies won't be enough. So what can America do? First, it needs to think long-term again. That means investing in infrastructure, education, and research, not just for today, but for the next 30 years. The US once led the space race with a national vision. It can do the same in AI, green energy, or semiconductors, if it has the will. Second, the US must rebuild its manufacturing base, not by copying China, but by innovating on its own terms. Automation, clean tech, and smart supply chains could bring high-value production back home. But only with government and private sector alignment. Third, it's time to strengthen global partnerships. While China uses infrastructure to build influence, the US can use shared values, open innovation, and transparent development as its edge. The world doesn't need just one model. It needs options. But here's the bigger idea. This doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. Cooperation in science, climate change, and health could benefit both nations and the world. Competition can push both sides to improve, but only if they compete with vision, not fear. Because the real danger isn't that China wins. It's that America stops trying to lead. The road ahead is uncertain. But one thing is clear. Global power is shifting. Not tomorrow, not someday, but right now.